Welcome back to the podcast, guys. Basic Banter for Witches. Jessica is here with you, and today I have a special guest. For those that you are watching on YouTube, you'll see his face there. So today I've got a traditional astrologer and an astrological magician, my goodness, an author. Generally, I guess this would be one of like the masters of Renaissance astrology, maybe. We've got Christopher Warnock with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
I want to first off, I mean, I've kind of already thanked you, but thank you so much for responding to my email about coming on. I really came onto your site by happenstance. In our previous episode, I did a little bit of, well, I guess we were talking about the Magus. We were talking about, you know, a book of spells, if you will. And it kind of led me down the Magus route. And that's where I came across Frances Barrett on your page. And I got into looking on your website, and you have immense amount of material, and like it's so beautifully laid out. It's so easy to read. It's easy to find information on your page. And I was just like blown away from the beginning. I literally said to my sister, I'm like, I've got to email him. I just have to ask. I just had to ask. So thank you so much. It really does mean a lot to kind of meet somebody else in the realm of what we're doing here. So thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the website, it's funny because it's so out of date. I mean, it's like driving a Model T on the highway. It's sort of like 20 years. On the other hand, if it was 5 years out of date, that would be kind of ooh, but it's 20 years out of date. It's now it's a thing. It's
It's
like obviously this is some kind of conscious, like, retro thing that we're doing. But the bottom line is nowadays you can't have a 700 page website. If you're the New
no.
York Times, you could,
Yeah,
but you would have to be paying a staff of 50 people to be constantly working on it, and you'd still have problems. Whereas
exactly.
you have just HTML like mine,
Yeah.
then basically you can, it's still accessible. It's just not as flashy.
Yeah.
So, um, I guess I'm just going to have it as a thing. But
Yeah.
I've been thinking about maybe I should have a Shopify because you have to have somebody else do it for, like Wix or something like that. I mean, you
Yeah.
get a template and do that. But even then, it's like I look at the templates and it all looks like Microsoft to me. I mean, they have all
Yeah.
50 different times as things you can have, and they all are like, I'm like, I don't like the look of them. So whatever. Like I said, this is
No,
what I'm out of touch until everything comes around to it again. There'll be this big thing about, oh, retro websites or
retro
something.
website. Well, you know what? It works. Like I said, it's
Well,
easy
yeah,
to
that's helpful.
navigate,
Yeah, that's good.
right? Like and I truly mean that. It's like, okay, so where am I going to learn a little bit more about you? May I call you Chris or Christopher? What would you
Sure,
prefer?
sure, sure,
Chris.
sure. Either is fine.
Okay. I've called you Chris about 40 times in my brain today, and I was like,
No,
oh
that's
no, till
that's
we
fine.
formally meet. But yeah, no, it was super easy to navigate. And when I was doing a little bit of research on you, all good things, I was going into some of like your previous like interviews that you've done, watching some of your videos that you've put out on YouTube. Like it's you've got, like I said, you've got a well of knowledge within you that you are sharing with everybody. And like and then you have courses. I'm like, oh my goodness, like you've got all of this stuff. Like I can only imagine how busy your brain is, but also how I hope you feel so achieved or well achieved because you've done such profound work. And I literally have only known about you for a week. Do you know what I mean?
Uh, Thanks. Really, it's astrology. People talk about astrology, right? And as if it was like one thing, and it's sort of like if you went to someone and said, what do you do? I like to cook. You say, oh, what kind of cooking? No, cooking.
Yeah.
Say, well, what kind of cooking? No, cooking. Like, what do you make? Oh, tamales, enchiladas. Oh, you mean Tex-Mex? It's like,
Okay. Yeah.
so when people talk about astrology, if you ask what kind, they say astrology back then, that mean modern astrology.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
nobody doing modern astrology will acknowledge it's modern astrology for
It's
some
just
reason. They
astrology.
run from that.
Yeah.
And you have different schools basically, and each
Yeah.
school has its own sort of philosophy and methodology, and everybody kind of is similar within that school. And so like Vedic astrology, people have heard of that's the traditional astrology of India.
Okay. Yeah.
You have um, um, Chinese astrology,
Okay.
they have
Yeah.
an astrology. Um, then Hellenistic astrology is potentially a school, but isn't anybody that really does purely Hellenistic. And
Okay.
so, and then what I do, it's a little complicated because the whole traditional thing, there's a whole war about labels. I mean, if you can label something and get everyone else to go on with the label, it's powerful. So there's a lot of fighting over how you label stuff.
Yeah.
and what things are called. So the the traditional stuff now has become meaningless as a label. I had
Okay.
somebody the other day email me and say, I'm a traditional astrologer. And they said, I want to buy a Procyon talisman because I have a rooster in the Chinese zodiac,
Like,
which
okay.
is like, what? I mean, it's just all sort
Okay.
of like, but they like the sound of traditional astrologer, so they're a traditional astrologer.
Yeah.
So that's basically what that's come down to. So I now describe what I do as medieval Renaissance astrology.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is the actual astrology as it was practiced in the Middle Ages and Renaissance in Europe.
Exactly.
Just
Within the
kind of a
period. Yeah.
mouthful, right? But the other thing that I would say about it is that what I'm doing is that I have the same worldview and methodology. As you went to an astrologer, like say William Lilly was a very famous astrologer in England in the 16th century, excuse me, 17th century. So if you went to him in 1650 and asked for a reading, right,
Yeah.
I would give you about 90% of what he would give you.
Yeah.
And so the difference though is like if you have like a Mayan astrologer now, right, or a Celtic
Yep.
astrologer, or whatever,
Yep.
if you went back to somebody a Mayan, you wouldn't be getting a reading like that. You know what I
No.
mean? This is it's modern. Again, there and people are really run from that title. I'll say that to people, and they're like, "No, no, I'm not." I'm like, it's not like calling you a communist or whatever,
Exactly.
a racist or something like that. It just is. It's just nobody seems to want to
Yeah.
embrace that. Now, modern astrology, if you look at the history of astrology in the West, it came from Babylonian Chaldea, from their religion. They had a very developed, use of the planets and stars in their religion. It diffused to the Romans and Greeks, so that's Hellenistic astrology.
Yep.
And then in the Middle Ages, when all this Roman Empire fell, they lost all the people that had the math that could do the calculations and all the stuff. So then it transferred over to the Byzantines, right? And then
Okay.
over
Yep.
to the advanced Islamic civilization. So in say 8 to 900 to the 10th century, the most advanced civilization in the West was the Islamic civilization in the Middle East.
Okay.
They developed a lot of the stuff even further, and then it came back in the Middle Ages. So like through places like Spain or Sicily that had been under Muslim control and were
Okay.
conquered by the Christians, they had people that could do translations and stuff, and people got interested in this advanced knowledge. So then it diffused into Europe. So then the European stuff, which is like I said, what I do, and then about say 1700 or so, the elites stopped believing in spiritual stuff. And so you have the quote enlightenment, which and the scientists, their job is basically a lot of the stuff they're doing is to try to eliminate what they call superstition, which means
Okay.
any spiritual stuff at all.
Okay.
So the modern way of thinking, the modern worldview, the modern reality is that nothing exists except matter and energy.
Yeah.
And so people don't want to get too far away from that, and they still do magic, and they still
Yeah.
do astrology, and they still do
Yeah.
divination, but are spiritual based, but then they also don't think that there's anything but matter and energy.
Yeah.
So this is one of the key problems with a lot of modern stuff is that people haven't really regained that. So for example, with astrology, how does it work?
Yeah.
Say, well, beams, rays, magnetism. I mean, there's a significant number of people that think it's magnetism. It's
Yeah.
not magnetism,
No. Yeah.
same with the magic. And so what they'll say is a little more sophisticated. They'll say, well, it's like a ray, but it's like an electromagnetic ray. It's impersonal, right? It's a force. It's beaming along and it's doing something to you.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty much the predominant view. So a talisman, see, I do astrological magic.
Yes,
We
you
make
do. Yes.
talismans. People think of it as a battery. So
Okay.
it's a physical object and there's energy coming into it and you charge it up and then you have to wear it. And so a lot of people are like, do I have to wear it next to my skin 24 hours a day? Do I have to in the shower when I'm having sex? And it's like, because that's everybody knows that you have
Yeah.
to wear it all the time. And I'm not sure where that comes from. It may be one of those internet things that just replicates, but
I
I think
think
the
so.
logic behind it is that there's energy, there's beams. So you
Yeah.
need to wear it to get the beams. And
Yeah.
then after a while, it runs out and you got to recharge it and you can throw it away or give it to somebody else because it's just a thing.
Yeah.
It's like an iPad
Yeah.
or something. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the modeling of it. And so, which isn't wrong, right? It's not my preference, but of course I don't like vanilla ice cream either, which doesn't mean that
Well,
vanilla ice cream is wrong.
yeah.
So I have a different model and it comes partly from traditional models and also partly from my own personality and modern stuff. I mean, I have a heavily Buddhist background. So my approach to things is what I would call devotional. So
Okay.
my focus, and you can have like a magical approach, which is more you want to make things happen, like
Yep.
effects, or you can have
Yep.
devotional, and they overlap. These are
Okay.
not really antithetical to each other. These are just sort of different ways of approaches. And
Okay.
so, for example, if you were like, devotional approach, my focus with the astrological magic is on astrological beings, right?
Yep.
So every astrological factor, like a planet or a fixed star or mansion of the moon or everything like that, I think has a spirit, or basically infinite spirits. And I focus on angelic, so angelic and
Okay.
archangelic.
Yep.
That's my focus. But on the other hand, I think that any planet is going to have infinite number of angels,
Yep.
and then also like archangels and powers and thrones and dominions and all that sort of stuff. Daemons, which are kind of intermediate spirits,
Yep.
demons. I mean, there's all sorts of infinite, all the way from the evil to neutral to positive. So there's an
Yep.
infinite, but this is the interface. So this is like we're basically interfacing with the spiritual through the astrological. So that's
Okay.
that's what astrological. So astrological magic is uh ritual and ceremonial magic in the Western esoteric tradition. This is my
Okay.
definition.
Yep.
That you only work with astrological spirits and that you only work with them at astrologically appropriate times.
Okay.
So that's kind of the three factors. Now you could split that up and to say, for example, that there's plenty of people that do ceremonial magic with say Jupiter or whatever,
Yep.
and don't do it at an astrologically appropriate time. They just go ahead and do it whenever they want.
Yep.
And so that's done. You have people that are doing astrological stuff without spirits at all.
Yep.
So they'll just, and then that's sort of like I said, the rays. And that also there's something called natural magic. I mean, they were afraid that the Inquisition would get after them. So if you're in the Middle Ages,
Yeah.
you would be like, okay, I'm going to make this talisman to get rid of scorpions, and I'll put Scorpio on it. I'll put the scorpion on it, and I'll make it with Scorpio rising, and I'll afflict, the Mars or the ruler of, Scorpio,
Or whatever.
and
Yeah.
then it'll work out. It'll work automatically.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
there's forces or rays or natural magic. And a lot of the reason they were worried about was didn't want it to be accused of working with demons. So anytime you're doing any kind of invocation, even if you said it was angelic, that was very suspicious. And
Yep.
so that's what but moderns people like it because it doesn't go against their atheistic materialism. So they
Yeah.
can be a physicalist. So their causality is beams. They're like, okay, we like that, you
Yep.
know? So, and then the other would be, you can do, like, for example, goetic magic. You could invoke these spirits that are not astrological, but you time them astrologically, like you
Yes.
do it on the moon phases or whatever. So that's
Yep.
also could be astrological magic too. So these are all, see what I'm saying? You can take those three definitions and pull them apart.
Yep.
It's interesting because I ran across this 17th century author who did the same thing. He racked through all those three things, talked about how people could do them separately, but he said, you know what? He said the strongest way is to do them all together.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say about it, is you've got a lot of little individual things, and you can, like I said, the timing plus the ritual,
Yep.
that's even more powerful than just timing or just ritual.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm
Absolutely.
saying? And it's not wrong to do them separately or whatever, but
No.
it's like there's also this thing of with astrology is that people want to look at something and they want to have 50 different factors
Yeah.
for the election. And partly because it'd be stronger that way, and also partly because they're afraid if like get one mistake in there, that'll blow everything up. But as a practical matter, you really can't do more than say 3, 4 factors. And
Yes.
so you kind of have to kind of compromise between, if you're so much of a perfectionist, you'll never get it done. Of course, if you only have one factor, if you just do it with moon phase, for example, moon waxing, that's not much of a talisman.
No.
It's pretty weak. So this part of what I do is to kind of figure out as a practical matter, how do you compromise between these things and
Yeah.
do it in practice? So that's because I'm very focused. What I did was, you know, I got into this medieval Renaissance astrology basically through horary. And
Okay.
horary astrology is
Yes.
a
It's
type of
amazing.
astrology where you ask a question and then you ask it of an astrologer, and then the astrologer takes the chart of the time that the astrologer understands the question and their location. And then you can get the answer. And they're very specific. So for example, you
Yeah.
said, will I marry this person? Will I marry X? Then you say, okay, I take the chart and then I look at it. And then I look at, for example, the first house always and the ruler of the first house, the planet that rules the first house always represents the person asking the question. Okay. And then each of the houses represents a different type of person or relationship or whatever or thing in regards to the person asking the question. So for you asking about money, you would ask about the second house would be money.
Yeah.
Fourth house would be the home. Sixth house would be illness or small animals, like a lost pet. Seventh house is for relationships, marriage or romantic relationships. So you look at the ruler of the seventh house and how that planet is. If it's strong, the person you're asking about is strong. If the planet is afflicted, the person you're asking about is afflicted. Okay, so that would give you the answer. Now
Interesting.
that
And sorry, just in
that
case
yeah,
that
go
would go
ahead.
through. So like if I were to ask you a question right now, it'd be based on the how everything's aligned at this moment.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, sorry. Okay, just to clarify.
Now,
Go ahead.
you
Yeah.
can think of your natal, because people think of astrology, modern astrology is natal astrology.
Yes.
And it's sort of like you open up your toolkit and all you have in your toolkit is a hammer.
Yep.
And so if you want to take a light bulb out, you hit it with a hammer. If you want to put a screw in, you put it with a hammer. I mean, they use natal for everything. The medieval Renaissance, we have horary, we have electional, we have all sorts of different. There's also mundane, which I don't do, but that looks at things like weather or long periods of history.
Yeah.
So the other thing is our technique is much more complex. It's because the medieval Renaissance is predictive. So we have the ability to look, say, at a planet and see whether it's really afflicted, weak, or whether it's weakly dignified, moderately dignified, or strongly dignified.
Yeah.
And then also the place. So I can look and get a very key on, what's strong, weak. So if you think about the horary astrology, it's a good example of why the rays and beams aren't the best model.
Yeah.
Because you could see how it might work with the natal astrology, like the planet's at a certain angle and it beams at you, and so you get a certain way or something from the chart, something
Yeah.
like that. Horary, how would that work? I'd
Yeah.
have beams when you're just asking a question.
Exactly.
That can only really work because the cosmos is so patterned that
Okay.
nothing happens without being part of the greater pattern. And there's an
Yeah.
infinite number of patterns and wheels and everything all working together and all
Yeah.
patterning everything. And so
Yeah.
therefore, if the other thing that's interesting about horary is that people say, why do you use your location as the astrologer? It's my question. And like, it's the cosmos's question.
Exactly.
You're aligned. If it's something you care about deeply, because you can't do a horary, I don't have a problem professionally because people have to pay. They
Yeah.
don't ask frivolous questions if they have to pay for it.
Yeah.
But for example, a relationship question, will I marry a person? People care about that really deeply.
Yeah.
And because of that emotional connection, then they're becoming aligned with those cycles. And
Okay. Yeah.
so, but if you don't ask the question, it's like a confession. You haven't made the confession until you're completing the circuit, so to speak. You could be
Okay.
thinking about it for a long. People say, "Oh, I've been thinking about it for a long time." You haven't manifested that question until you ask the astrologer. So
Okay.
that's why everything's connected. The heavenly cycles, your emotional state, the question, and then the asking the astrologer all come together in that chart. And
Yeah.
so the patterning, the job of the horary astrologer then is to read it. So the way that you read it is there's a tremendous amount of technique in medieval
Yeah.
Renaissance.
I
And we
can
have a lot of
imagine.
built up. Like if you look at, there's a book it's called Christian Astrology, which freaks everybody out because of course Christianity is bad. The guy who wrote it, William Lilly, he only called it Christian Astrology because he wanted it to look good. It has nothing to do with Christianity per
Yeah.
se. So it's just funny that he used that as a way to cover up because people were suspicious of astrology. And now
Kind of
people are like, well,
slide it in there.
I don't like Christian stuff. So I'm like, don't worry, it doesn't have anything to do with Christian astrology. But so there's a huge amount of information in that book, and he gives a lot of examples. Great. But the thing is, you still have to use your intuition. So, but what it does is you're very trained and you're very assisted. So you're like 30 feet in the air, and then you can do the intuition. Whereas something like tarot, there's not as much technique, and you immediately have to use your intuition.
Yeah.
So all forms of divination are a combination of technique and intuition in various levels, depending on what you're working with. But and that intuition is really like a patterning ability, like a big picture thing, like an alignment. You know what I mean? It's just interesting how, and it can be trained in it too. I mean,
Yeah.
and so what I say to my students is I say, first thing is don't doubt it
Yeah.
because the modern worldview, atheistic materialism, is that there's nothing except matter and energy. So if you break everything down, it's subatomic particles randomly bumping into each other or physical laws, but there's no inherent meaning and no inherent patterning to anything. And that goes through and let's say the whole nihilism thing, like, it's meaningless and you're not alive and then you're alive and it's painful and you die, that kind
Yeah.
of thing, that
Yeah.
nihilistic view, that is antithetical to intuition. Because if you don't think, I mean, how can you even think that it works if there's or you're operating with it, you're trying to make something work that you don't inherently believe in.
Believe.
And
Yeah.
this is the problem
Exactly.
with atheistic materialism as everyone's unconscious view of reality, because it
Yeah.
messes you up in terms of
Yeah.
trying to do spiritual stuff. If there's no spiritual anything and you're
Yeah.
trying to do something spiritual, you're constantly kind of tugging at a tug of war with yourself. But people
Exactly.
don't want to give up the atheistic materialism because there's so much propaganda. I had someone say to me, "Oh, we can't go back to superstition," and I'm like, if that's how you
Yeah.
want to look at it.
It's fear
Um,
mongering is what it's kind of turned into
yeah,
in a lot of
but
these
also
cases.
it's like, I mean, it's just the higher you get up into the elite structures of the society, the stronger it is. And so
Yeah.
it's just like, and it's okay for everybody the hoi polloi to run around and mess around with astrology as long as
Yeah.
it's, I mean, I like where we are right now because if you go back to the medieval Renaissance or classical period, if you're an astrologer, you could get yourself in some serious trouble with the
Yeah.
government. And 50 years ago, you get in trouble with the government because it's inherently fraudulent, right?
Yeah.
So we're in a nice intermediate phase where it's sort of a joke. And so that's nice.
Yeah.
It's just kind of
You can just
amusing. They
kind
don't
of,
take it seriously, but you don't get in trouble for doing it either. Now, for example, in New York State, it's a felony to pretend to tell fortunes. So if you think it's real and say it's real, that's a felony. Now, most people get away with it. And also, if you say
yeah.
it's for entertainment only, that's like that tells you what the reality is there, is that
Yeah.
they don't mind if you say it's fake, but you really get yourself in trouble where you try to say that this is real. And
Yeah.
that's what's most problem. Now, the
Yeah.
what happens is that the courts have been, if they try to have these statutes that say that, it's illegal to be an astrologer or fortune teller, they throw them out because it's First Amendment. And there's a case in the circuit, the Federal Court of Appeals where I am, and they said, look, it was a case that had to do with a paid fortune teller, and they said, if you want to pay a fortune teller, no matter how ridiculous we might think it is, that's your business. You can think what you want. And
Yeah.
so that's the pretty much, thank goodness for the First Amendment.
Yeah.
So at least in the US.
Yeah.
But so that's what I would say about it, is that so in the intuition stuff is interesting too, because I mean, someone who's a psychic, I know, I think it's definitely possible. I don't know if any individual person is, right? But that's someone who's able to inherently pick up the underlying patterning, right? And
Exactly.
pick up that cycles and things. And I
Yeah.
can't do that. But if I have a chart, then it gets me enough the way there that I can say, oh, this is it.
Yeah.
So for example, a relationship question, you ask about a relationship, then the ruler of the seventh house, which represents that person, that planet is afflicted. And so that means that they're either unable, unwilling, or unsuitable for the desired relationship. It's at least one indication. You don't
Yeah.
judge on one indication, but that's what it is. So which of those three it is, you'd have to look at the rest of the chart and then also the intuition. And
Okay.
so
Yeah.
that's what I mean, I've got to the point now where it used to be much more agonizing for me to do readings because I would doubt myself. I had writer's block or whatever. Now I can just be
Always.
like,
Yeah.
like this is what it seems like to me. And so the beauty of horary is it's amazingly accurate. Now, not always, because people ask me, what's your percentage? I don't know. How could you quantify that?
Yeah.
I mean, but it is kind of incredible when people come back and say, like for example, if you nail the timing of things, like 3 days or something, I mean, that's very hard to do. I don't like to do timing.
No.
Um, but it's so that's what I would say about it, is it's kind of nice to have so much assistance and then you'd use your intuition.
Yeah.
So, but that's really underlying that is this and what I found was interesting about horary was I've done probably 5,000 horary readings for clients and I do them
Yeah.
all in writing.
Oh
And so
yeah.
what I do is I get the chart and then I have a whole sort of format that I go through and I write it all down. And then if they give me back the results later, I put that down. So I've probably got maybe 400 results back, which I
Okay.
have a file of those. And having done that, it blew up my atheistic materialism.
Yeah.
And so rather than being compartmentalized, because a lot of people, they do one little weird thing they do, and then they just go back to their normal life. It actually blew up everything. And I realized, this is not, this works. So therefore, that atheistic materialism is not the best model for
Yeah.
understanding. I
I
mean,
truly
it's not like a
believe. Oh,
bad model, but no, go ahead.
no. No, I was just gonna say, I truly believe like sometimes when as humans we get ourselves into our little like ego hole where we don't know which way to go, it's like we do need that nudge from whatever, right? So if it's astrology, if it's like, okay, it's written in the stars, what do I need? Okay, well that must be right. Do you know what I mean? So I do think that that is a good push for people to act, depending on wherever you stand, on the listener's side as well, is if that's going to help you, your call to action, and that's what you need, then I think that's I think what people are looking for is a reason to act as well. So sometimes giving them it on paper
I
as
think
well.
part of it is also there's this like, I'm a big believer in, like I said, synchronicity,
Yeah.
but a lot of that ends up having to be sort of intuitional and ad hoc. Whereas the advantage of the traditional, of the medieval Renaissance astrology is it's so, you know, programmed out for you. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So you don't have to be ad hoc about it. Now,
Yeah.
people go the other way. Is that what people will do is like they'll look at a talisman, it's got the chart up there, and they'll go, "Oh, look, because someone even said this to me once. She said, "Well, my husband's and my combined chart midpoint is sesquiquadrate the midpoint of that chart," and I'm like, you could find anything that, you know what I mean? That's so
Yeah.
out there. Which is not to say that that's not a synchronicity.
Yeah.
Like if you looked at the chart and said, "Oh, my uncle Bob has a blue dog." I'm going to get this. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, fine. It's not astrological though. I mean, that's what people
Yeah.
sort of think, that they're like Galileo, not Galileo, they're like Abu Mashar or something, and they're making up
Mhm.
some astrological stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no. I mean,
Yeah.
I believe in synchronicities, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily astrological.
Yeah.
But that's modern. You make it up. That's how
Yeah.
it works. You just kind of,
Yeah.
everybody kind of is out there making up their own stuff. And I'm like, that's fine as long as you recognize that that's what you're doing.
Exactly. That is
So
just
okay.
made up.
Did
I do
you
have
have
a
a
question for actually
question?
I got
Yeah, I was gonna
oh
say.
yeah, I've got a few questions for you, but
I'll
you're
just
doing great.
I'll
In
just riff off of them.
so just because we're talking a little bit more about intuition right now, and we always say
Mm.
like, no, like working and trusting your intuition is a huge task for a lot of people. Now, people who are entering the astrological verse, let's say, what would you recommend they work on first? Like, would you say, study the charts, get familiarized there, and then bring in your intuition there? Or do you think having a good base or trust of your intuition prior, do you
I mean,
know,
it doesn't really, again, part of it is like most people doing modern astrology, what they do is they go online and they go on some social media and they pick up a few like void of course moon and Mercury retrograde and whole sign house system. There's some like pop stuff out there, and then they're astrologers and they look at some stuff and they make it up, and then they're an expert. And so
yeah,
that's, I don't think it really makes much difference. You can do whatever you want if you're doing it that way. I mean, if you have a teacher, I mean, like I said, it's part of it is like my other career, I'm a lawyer, and nobody
yeah,
thinks they can learn law by themselves, And so they're a little bit more like, when I'll say stuff, they're like, okay, that makes sense. They don't usually argue with me about it or try to rewrite. I mean, I had somebody who tried to rewrite, I was helping her out with a case, and I wrote a brief for her, a motion, and she
yeah.
rewrote it. And I was like, what? I just thought that was kind of crazy. But with astrology, people figured you just all just make it up and you can
Yeah,
learn it in 15 minutes. Or I'll just ask a few questions. And I'm just like, really, and I get people constantly emailing me, asking me these like technical questions. I'm like, if you're serious about this, you should take my course.
literally.
Right.
Yeah, that's why you
Yeah.
have them, right?
Yeah,
Because I'm
exactly. And
sure
it's
those
just
little
much more
questions have added
efficient.
up.
It's more
Yeah,
efficient for people, and it's more efficient for me. And also, a lot of times, I get this like question, sort of like, I know that the Santa Claus demon is going to come down my chimney if I don't stop him. So if I put mesh or chicken wire, what's the best to stop the Santa Claus demon from coming down my chimney for Christmas? Like, that's my question. Should I use mesh or wire? I'm
ugh,
like, whoa, we need to back up. You know what I'm saying? I get so many questions where there are a lot of the assumptions are built into it. And I'm like, I don't agree with your assumptions, or
yeah,
you're off on a realm that I'm not particularly. So that's what I would say about it, is that part of the problem is that there is a tendency to think, when you get the more like even modern astrology or medieval Renaissance, when you're getting into a teaching mode where you're learning all the techniques, the
yeah,
view is the techniques work by themselves,
yes, okay.
that you could just
So,
program it into a computer. First of all, that there's one right way of doing things.
yep,
Like, for example, that there's one right house system,
yep.
and I'm like, that's sort of technical stuff. I don't even care. I mean, people ask me and I'm like, whatever. I just use, it's like asking me whether I have an AMD chip or Intel chip. I mean, I don't care. I just, I
Does it
work with it.
work? Does the
Yeah.
computer
And
work? Great.
so that's one of those things. So you got to, or you have the people that just don't bother to learn anything at all and doing free intuition. So you got to
Yeah,
come down somewhere in between. In terms of training intuition, what I suggest to people is, first of all, don't doubt that it exists. You know what I mean? If you think that reality is just this painful, unpleasant, nihilistic,
yeah,
random thing, it's going to be hard to have intuition.
yeah,
The next thing is that that you don't have it.
yeah,
I mean, everybody has the ability to do it. The next problem is that it's very hard. It's very easy to confuse intuition with emotion. I know I won the lottery. I know I won the lottery. Oh, I know that this happened or whatever. It's emotional. And so you'll realize after a while, when you start paying attention to it, that, separating emotion from intuition is really, really kind of difficult. So what you do
yeah,
is you start to just pay attention to stuff. And like my wife and I, we call it looping. Like, somebody will mention some obscure, like, for example, I was talking about there's this Black Dahlia murder in LA in the 30s,
yep.
right? I was talking to somebody about it. I get on the metro and in the subway in DC. I'm 20 minutes later, and someone's got to book Black Dahlia murder. They're carrying that. So I'm like, wow, that's interesting. Now, what I would say about that is that is sort of like the tip of the iceberg. There's some underlying patterning that's been revealed.
Yes.
But I think it's very important to say, I don't know what it is,
Yeah.
because that's what people do automatically, is like, oh, I know what that is. It's like, no, you don't. But
Yeah.
just notice it, And then you start realizing that there's this incredible patterning, and
Yeah.
drop talking about coincidences. It's all synchronicity,
Yeah,
you
you
know.
had mentioned in a previous interview of yours, a couple different things. On the topic of patterns here, you had said, I guess you do a lot of study of cycles. So do you think that pattern is like, you know, I guess when life is laid out that way, like we're all on our own cycles, and that's just like what it is, and we've relived it a few times, or we're just, I don't know if this is making any sense or if it's just like gibberish, but do you think that that could be any sort of relation to the patterns that you're talking about?
I think what you got to first start doing is recognizing there's not one right answer,
Yeah,
right? And that answer is what I think.
yeah,
See, that's the guy. There's one right answer, and
yeah.
of course, I think it because if it was wrong, I wouldn't think it. So
That's
there's a
true.
right answer and a wrong answer, and if it was wrong, I wouldn't think it, so I must be right. You
Okay, yeah.
know. So
Yeah.
that's typical. The other thing is another one is for classic with this is like, that's not good. I'm good. I'm not that.
Yeah. Okay.
Like racism is a good one like that. Racism is bad.
I'm not
I'm
racist, so
good.
it's good. Yeah. Yeah.
Therefore, it's yeah, that's logic. And it doesn't matter
Yeah.
with whatever. I don't like whatever type of people. That's irrelevant. But it's like it's bad.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that ego stuff gets in there and gets in the way. I mean, in terms of like, I mean, I'm coming out of a basically I'm talking about operating systems, right? So you have worldview, you have an operating system. I have basically a Buddhist operating system. So that's provided a lot of the philosophy and underpinnings for stuff. And it's nice because I don't have to reinvent the wheel,
Yeah.
you know? And I mean, a lot of people like, I don't, all that old stuff is all a bunch of BS. And I'm just going to make up something new for me, my own religion. And it turns out to be the same as everybody else's,
Yes.
same
Yeah.
new age thingy that everyone else is doing. You can't create your own thing entirely because you're coming out of this whole cultural thing
Yeah.
background. So, but the Buddhist stuff is useful because somebody else has spent a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about stuff. It resonates with me. And so I can kind of draw on that, as a way of figuring stuff out. So the Buddhist
Yeah.
stuff is heavily, I mean, they've got reincarnation, but see, reincarnation in the Buddhist view is not, I have this immortal soul that's unchanging, that I was Cleopatra, then I was a donkey, and now I'm me. And it's the same thing. It's if you think about candle, right? If you light a
Yeah.
candle and you light another candle and you light another candle and you light another candle to the 10th candle, is that flame the same or different?
Yeah. Well, are you using
It's
the
not the
same
same and it's not
flame?
different.
Are you using the
But no,
flame
I'm
from the
saying
first
it's
candle to light the
no, I'm saying
second
lighting.
candle?
You're lighting one from the what? You know what I'm saying? So you
The
light
different
the like
creations
candle one
altogether.
goes to light to candle two, goes to the candle three, to candle four,
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
10th candle. Is that the same flame or different flame?
Yeah. I mean,
So that's
yeah.
what talking about your reincarnation is that the Buddhist view is that there's a connection, right? But
Yeah.
it's not identical. And after a
Mhm.
while, it becomes different.
Yeah.
It's so different, even though it's connected. There's such a difference. But think of you and your mother when you were before you were born, you're the same. You're so
Yeah.
intimately connected to your mother that you're
Yeah.
the same,
You're the
right?
same.
And
But
and then
yeah.
but you're born, then you separate, right?
Yeah.
But think of the difference when you're born and when you're 90 years old. I mean, this is very different, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yet, well, we see that's the same person. So you see what I'm saying? There's this like a constant evolution
Absolutely.
of things. Everything's in flux, and there's incredible connection of things. And so
Well, it, yeah.
that's a more Buddhist view than, like I said, I'm this immortal soul that's all
Yeah.
exactly identical throughout all
Yeah.
eternity.
I
So not
definitely
to say
I
it's
yeah.
wrong, but I'm just saying this is a way to kind of like this is
Yeah.
where I'm coming from. And I like the model. A lot of stuff you know, people have had such terrible experiences with people that call themselves Christians that it has a bad rap. But I also feel like that the theology is kind of illogical in a lot of ways. I mean, Jesus is the master of the heart chakra, so there's an emotional. It hasn't. There is a core to it that is a legitimate spiritual path,
Yeah.
like the monks and nuns, the contemplatives. But I have an easier time with Buddhism or even Islam because they're a little more logical in the way they approach things.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
that's
that's
fair.
just my preference. Though. Like I said, that's why I like vanilla ice cream and I don't like chocolate.
Yeah.
But see, to
Exactly.
condemn that is just like, that's my one of my big messages because I'm always in the minority. Whatever I'm doing, I always seem to be, maybe that's my Aquarian side. I always seem to be outside what everyone else does. So in order for me not to get shouted down or stomped on, I have to kind of say, okay, everyone's, got to respect everybody because otherwise I'm
Exactly.
not going to get it. I'm going to get
Yeah.
stomped. And but that's kind of my function.
Sure.
I mean, when I started doing astrological magic 30 years ago, nobody else in the medieval Renaissance people, they didn't want to touch it.
No,
because it's
yeah.
magical.
It's
Just like,
it's
no,
the
you're
term
making us look
magic.
bad. You're making us
Yeah.
look bad. And we want to be acceptable, but to scientists and, and to, get insurance reimbursement for counseling and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
we don't want to be doing magic. And so, you know, but I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
That was kind of always been my thing. I like, sounds cool. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And
When
so,
sorry.
you
Like
know,
when, oh, so you said they started this about like 30 years ago. Now, in your young childhood
98.
life, like it's like, back when, did you have any inkling as to like this would be
Oh yeah,
where
I knew
you would be
exactly what I was
now?
going to do. I was going to be like, when I was like, I remember this, like, I must have been like, I had to be at least 14. But I was like, I wanted to speak up for the oppressed, like Carolyn Stero,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I want to be a wizard. So that's it. So that's why I'm a lawyer and I'm a wizard. I mean, I knew that now I lost that, I was very conventional. Like in college and even into law school, I was just like, I was
Yeah.
captured by I mean, I had a choice. I went to undergraduate and ended up in Scotland. I went to the University of
Yeah.
St. Andrews. So I did my undergrad there and I loved it. I just was told because I did history too. I've just been really always
Yeah.
been taken with history. And so I had a choice between working hard and going to Cambridge and becoming an academic
Yeah.
or being lazy. And then I could go to law school and I'd be rich and powerful. And I would decide to be lazy. And
Lazy.
that was kind of my approach. But it turned out that I hated law school, but I loved being a lawyer.
Yes.
And so that ended up being a good path for me. And then what happened was after I graduated from law school, like the, the law school I went to, pretty much they kind of channeled you to go to either New York or Washington, D.C. in a big law firm.
Yeah.
So we ended up in Washington, D.C. And I just kind of spontaneously became a spiritual seeker and just sort of what that is kind of there's a smorgasbord there's an incredible amount of stuff you can sort of sample. And so you
That's
read
yeah.
things and you try a little bit of things and you try a little bit of this, try a little bit of that, and you just kind of sample around. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of started me off. And at that point, I started looking at astrology and I read some modern stuff, which was interesting, like Liz Green or Daniel Rudyard, psychological astrology, natal
Yeah.
astrology. But it just didn't catch my interest. But then I ran across the horary
Yeah.
and I'm like, yeah, this is it.
This
And so I
fits your
really ran.
history buff. This fits kind of
Yeah,
a little
it
bit
all
more of your
fit the
alignment.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that
Oh,
started me off. And then I ended up with the astrological magic. See, horary is, like I said, using the chart of the moment.
yeah.
Electional astrology is like the sister or mirror of horary because you use it to pick times to do things. So if you want to get
Okay.
married, you want to find a good time to get married. If you ask, will I marry this person? Will this be a good
Yeah.
marriage? And you got a yes, that chart would also be a good chart for getting
For
married.
when? Okay, for sure.
Yeah. So
Okay.
all the factors that were positive in that chart would say, okay, that's a good time to get married.
Yeah.
So, and marriage charts are actually a pain in the butt. I don't like them because people are like, well, we can only get the caterer between 3 and 5 on June 5th. And isn't that a
Jeez.
great day? And my job is to say, yes, it's a great day. And I'm like, actually, it's terrible,
Actually, but
So
the
it's really,
caterer.
really hard. It's much easier to do elections. Ones are like, for
Yeah.
example, the easier ones are like business elections because you just go online and log in and do it.
Yeah.
You can do it anytime.
Yeah.
And that makes it really much easier because I got to the point now when it's elections, I can't, people can't say, well, it has to be a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday between 9 and 5 and not on this day. I'm like, no way, it's too difficult. It's too much
Yeah.
effort. I'm like, you can you can say next 30 days or 60 days or 9 days, whatever you want, time frame, but you got to
Yeah.
be 24/7,
Yeah.
7 days a week.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's just, and the bold bottom line is that the stars will not adapt to your schedule.
No.
They're not going to fit what's convenient for you. You have to basically, if
Exactly.
you want that alignment, you have to basically drop everything else and go with the election. Now, that saying, people seem to think that I like elect everything. I don't walk out the door with that. I'm like,
Yeah.
don't do it very often. Important stuff I'll elect, but typically I'm not like, and part of that comes from, and this is another issue that I've been noticing recently is that for the most part, astrology is not used for people for prediction.
Yeah.
Ostensibly it is, but it's actually used for reassurance or for giving a false sense of control.
Yep.
And so,
Yep.
people ask me as a horary question, when am I going to get a job? And my job is to come back and say, in 3 weeks,
Three weeks. Yeah. That person.
and I'll
Yeah.
say to people, I said, is it going to help you if I say you're not going to get a job? And then some people get upset with that. But I'm like, this is real. I'm actually going to predict. And there's always a chance of a no answer, particularly if you've
Yeah.
been out of work for a year, right?
Yeah.
But the reason they're asking me is they want me to say everything's going to be okay. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's actually predictive, so it doesn't work for that very well.
Yeah.
But And the other thing is like the whole Mercury retrograde thing, which is like, what happened? Oh, well, I don't know. It's Mercury retrograde. And it was like, well, you couldn't predict it in advance. You
Exactly.
like your whatever has happened, and you didn't, you say, well, that's your explanation for it. Or what they'll do is look at Hitler's chart. It's like, oh, we can see what happened in Normandy, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, you can make up anything you want. If you know what
That's
the outcome
too
is, you can
right.
just fit into it. So
Yeah.
that's what I would say about it, is that, which is fine, but it's
Yeah.
sort of like and I do that myself to a certain extent. Like like I said, I Ching. So, I mean, I'll do like, for example, current situation. And sure, I'd like to get a yes, but if I get a no, I'm like, okay, and I don't ask five
Yeah.
times until I get the answer I want, I don't ask five times anyway. I just stick with it. I had that recently where the chart, it gave me, there's one called four, which is, I think it's youthful folly and a lot of things. And four is like, you get that if you ask the same question too many times. So
Okay,
like,
yeah.
yeah,
So it's
ding me
like
with
you've been
that one.
told so many times.
Yeah,
I
don't
find
do
that
it.
like I'm like a
Respect the
tarot
Oracle,
reader and I do tarot and I do oracle and mediumship and stuff like that.
right?
And it's like because I've struggled with that as well because yeah, I'm gonna pull the cards or whatever, and when I do my readings with people, it's like, just so you know, you're gonna get the answer that you need, not the one you want. So if you've come here for yes answers and yes, 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 be prepared that that's not what could happen, right? Because your guides, your people may not want you to, like, they need to get something through to you. So living in this world, this is where social media is so bad, right? Because yeah, I could go on TikTok and find a video that I liked that's like, oh, really good for relationships, da da da. I liked it, or I spent too long on the video. Well, now the algorithm is going to keep pushing all of those videos about readings specifically to positive relationship outcomes at me, right? So that's where, okay, that's going to continue to feed that not even false sense of security. It's just a comforting thing that's unrealistic. That's not reality.
Well, I mean, it's just, it's funny because I have a book mostly for my students, but I put it on Amazon called Horror Case Book. And
Yeah.
what it is real questions from people, and then the chart, and then my analysis, and then the
Yeah.
results.
Yeah.
And then my students can go through and they can practice. So they can look at the question and then look at the chart, and then they can see what they get as their answer, and then they can look at the results. They can
Very
work on it.
good.
And I had people complaining about it, saying there's not enough positive answers in there. And because my job is to give positive answers. And so this is sort of tacit conspiracy of, I'll pay you and you tell me what I want to hear, and I won't tell you that you got it wrong.
Uh-huh.
I won't come back and complain about it. Or I might
Exactly.
come back and complain about it. I mean, that's the other double
Another
bind with
thing.
people, is just like, you didn't tell me the answer I want. And then I give you the answer that I want, and then it's wrong. And I come back and yell at you for that. So it's like,
Yes.
really, but I mean, I notice that with my students because they don't want to give people bad news. And I'm
No.
like, you better get ready for that if you're going to do horror, because horror, I mean, if you're going to ask a question, if you're going to pay, you already must be something going wrong anyway.
Yeah.
You're probably not, if everything's going great, you're probably not going to ask a question.
Yeah.
And so you're going to give people no answers. And often things don't work out. I mean, the
Yeah.
people are asking stuff like, should I go into business with this person? It's really
Right.
very solid stuff. Like, should I marry this person? Am I going to leave the house? Should I buy this house? Things like that.
Yeah.
And so that's very concrete stuff. And it's
Yeah.
like, what I like about it too is that you can't wiggle on those. I
No.
mean, I don't know the answer, and then I get the
Yeah.
question, and I'm either right or I'm not right.
Well,
And so
exactly.
it's not sort of like, oh, I can kind of do a vague positive answer and then wiggle out of it at the end. So
Yeah.
so that's what I'd say about it. I appreciate the fact that you're like telling people that, because I think if you're serious, I mean, what I would recommend to people is that, you're talking about intuition, is that when you start doing any kind of readings, that you write them down and keep
Yes.
a record of it.
Yes.
So keep the spread, right? Do the question, keep the spread, whatever it is, and then get the results back. And
Yeah.
anything you do, because that's the whole gold standard. Because whenever you're doing this stuff of like,
Yeah.
you already know the outcome, and then you're trying to go backwards, people say, well, it's practicing. It's, because I had someone, I was put this thing up about it. I said, it's ridiculous. And they're like, oh, we're practicing. It's like, they just don't want to have that taken away from them, because you don't
Exactly.
have any risk. It's riskless. If you know
It's
the outcome and you're doing some kind of learned disquisition about how the cards or
yeah.
whatever fit that, it's useless. It is not going to
Exactly.
help you. Now, the casebook thing, that example comes from a question where I didn't know the outcome. So you
Yeah.
can watch me doing it. But if I just was looking at Hitler's chart and saying, oh, Normandy, blah, 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 I'll give you an
Yeah.
example that I did of this. Um, I put up a chart from like 1880, and it had Scorpio rising and a lot of planets in the 8th house, which is kind of malefic. And so I said, oh, it's a serial killer, maybe Jack the Ripper. And they're like, oh yeah, serial killer. And they were talking about all the serial killer stuff in the chart. And I said, oh, actually, it's Gandhi.
Yeah.
And
Like,
people were like, oh. And so the only comment was, well, Gandhi's like a serial killer.
yeah.
And they weren't getting my point, which is like, if I tell you what the outcome is or tell you who the person is, you will make the chart fit that,
And
you know?
literally, that's exactly, yeah, that's one of my
And
rules when
that's
I do
what
my
people do
readings.
for
It's
like
like,
90% of the time
yeah,
is,
they're
and the other
trying
thing I
to,
do with readings too is with a question, I don't get any information from them. I don't want any information. I need to orient myself. Like, for example, somebody yesterday asked me, should I work with these two people? And I said, what's your relationship? I said, are these your bosses, your equals, or your employees? Because it would be
yeah,
different house. And they
different
said, my
houses.
bosses. I said, that's it. But because that's the other thing about astrology readings is I think I'm, again, being totally bizarre, doing it in writing and not getting information. People always say, can I make an appointment? So what you do is all you do is you make the appointment, you roll in, and
Yeah.
then you just cold read the person.
Yes. Yeah.
You look at the chart and they tell you stuff. You say, oh, look in the chart, blah, 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 blah. And then you give them some sort of vague positive stuff and then you're done,
Yeah.
you know?
Exactly.
And there's no record of it either.
Yeah.
So you don't remember, oh yeah, I got it right. It was brilliant. So
Yeah.
I'm like, that to me is like, and that's fine. Like I said,
Yeah.
as long as it's people know, and there's nothing wrong with reassurance either.
Yeah.
The problem is it's not very reassuring if you know it's for reassurance.
No, it's
You have to
assurance
keep up
in,
that kind of like
yeah, it
facade.
it's assurance with the convenience of the quick and like, oh yeah, okay, that's perfect. That's all I needed to know. It's there's no I shouldn't say people don't want to go in depth. They don't, again, we talked a little bit about light and dark earlier. They don't want to see anything that could be viewed as negative because, oh, we don't dabble there. It doesn't matter. Like, I don't want to dwell on any of that. And it's, again, that's kind of what makes you a whole person. That brings everything together. We are yin and yang. That is the entirety of who we are.
See, part of the advantage I have is that I came at this from a lawyer perspective.
Yes.
And see, modern astrology is from a psychologist's perspective.
Yeah.
And so in psychology, you don't come in saying, well, only certain people are going to benefit from this. And, some people don't even get better. You give everybody a chance to benefit from it. You want to be upbeat and positive to help people do their thing. And
Yes.
that's how modern astrology works for the most part, except there's a few things like void of course moon or retrograde Mercury that are negative, and they're super negative because the only negative things they have to carry all the weight of negativity.
Everything.
And
Yeah.
so then people freak out on it. But see, what I'm getting with horror is not sort of metaphysical questions or spiritual questions. It's like I said, should I buy this house? And that lends itself
Yeah.
to a very concrete yes, no. And okay, I say, no, well, it's overpriced. It's got problems with the foundation.
Yeah.
The seller is not reliable. So probably, in fact, you're probably going to decide on your own not to buy the house. And I don't think you
Exactly.
should anyway because it's a bad deal.
Yeah.
So
And
that's how those readings
yeah.
come out is super
Yeah.
concrete,
Yeah.
and not
Yeah.
metaphysical, not like, oh, personal growth or anything like that, which isn't to say there's anything wrong with that, but
Yeah.
it's like really, really like going to a lawyer. Like I said, going to a lawyer and asking for like, a analysis of the brief or something or your legal case. And I have that problem as a lawyer too, because people will call me up and they'll be like, I mean, I do landlord tenant law. That's my specialty.
Yeah.
And so tenants who don't know much about it will call me up and they'll be like, they're all upset about the situation. And I'm like trying to give them practical advice. And I'm like, yes, it's messed up. Yes, it's the thing, but this is what you can actually do. Like, for
Yeah.
example, people like have problems with like, the landlord won't take care of X. And I said, really, there is no way to make them do the right thing.
Yeah.
They're like, but is it legal? I said, the speed limit on the highway is 70 miles an hour. That doesn't
Yeah.
stop people from going more than 70 miles an hour. I said, legal, that's an interesting theoretical question. But I said, if you want
Yeah.
to actually have practical steps to deal with the situation,
Yeah.
this is what I would recommend. And so, they're like, no, I want to stay and I'll make them do this and my rights and all that. And
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? That's, they can't hear me,
No, that's
And
exactly. They've already
so
made up their mind. They're just looking for that confirmation that
exactly
yeah.
confirmation of that and some official person, but that won't help them either. Because then
No,
they'll go back and yell at the landlord, well, this lawyer told me X, and it's like this
but
still isn't
that's
going to get them anywhere. But
yeah. And
that's
yeah,
but
it's
that's the choices
accountability.
between. Here's the thing though, is that if given the choice between having a hissy fit or doing something practical, a lot of people choose the hissy fit, but they're not gonna, but they'll still insist they want to be practical.
Yeah.
I'm
That's
being practical. I'm doing the
yeah.
practical thing, and I'm just going to freak out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, so that's part of what I would say about it is that I think that a lot of what, if you're going to be doing prediction, divination, it's like you kind of have to make a fundamental choice between making people happy or giving them an accurate answer. And there's nothing wrong with making people happy, right?
Mm.
But my choice was that I wanted to be accurate. Now the downside of that is that I make people unhappy, you
Yeah.
know? And also I get stuff wrong. And that's the thing I'd say to people. I mean, for example, relationship questions is kind of funny too, because if you ask a relationship question and I give them a no, they go ahead anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like a business deal. And I say to people, you
Exactly.
should. I had someone recently
Yeah.
and I gave him a no and he said, okay, I'm giving up. I said, what? I
Like,
said, what kind of a relationship is that where you're just going to give up? I said, what I recommend to people is I said, just don't sell the farm. Don't give, don't like move to Australia or something based on this, or don't give them all your
yes.
money. I said,
Exactly.
just keep it
Yeah.
kind of in the back of your mind. It might not work out, but
Exactly.
go ahead and do it. I mean, the
Yeah.
heart is more important, go ahead and do your thing, but just,
Yes.
give it a shot.
That's where
But
the intuition comes back as well. It's like, again, like sometimes when those readings are, happening as well, it's like either I'm going to be your scapegoat to give you the, oh, well, he said it was going to be, I had to sell the house, so I'm selling the house. They needed that. They needed to put the accountability on somebody else, right? And that I feel like that I get that a lot with my readings as well, where it's like, okay, again, you wanted me to say that, but you knew that was already the answer. Your intuition works. You could have done that yourself. But again, it's getting that like, okay, but now you've said it, so I'm gone. You know what I mean? And it's like they've already given up before they even heard the answer they already knew. I don't know. I get that a lot. I don't know if you do as well, but
I mean, what I would say is that I think that because sometimes people say, well, I already knew that. And I'm like, well, I mean, as you said, you have the intuition about it. And like, this doesn't mean there's anything wrong with my reading. You're supposed to come
no,
in. You're supposed to be flabbergasted or something. I'm like,
exactly. I don't have sparklers
except
or
that
like
what I would
flash.
say though is that if all you're giving me is the question
Yeah. Yeah.
and I have no other information, and yet I'm coming back and giving you this very precise layout of what's actually happening,
Yeah.
that's kind of impressive. Even if of course, you knew what's going on, you're in it. But
Yeah.
I didn't know all that stuff. I'm not reading
Exactly.
it back to you. I'm getting it out of the chart in my reading of the
Yeah.
situation. So it's like,
Yeah.
but whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
the clients, what I find is that the problem with horror is that there's a zillion people doing it, and so people do it for free or $5, and so
Yeah.
therefore people don't want to pay me. I think what I 85 for what I charge now, which is less than a lot of other professional people do.
Yeah.
But I kind of like doing them. But I think people think it's all fungible. I mean,
Yeah.
why pay five not? Why pay 85 if I can get it for five? It's all the same
Yeah.
thing anyway, right?
Yeah.
Or why should I pay? Or someone do
Exactly.
it for free? I used to do a lot more horrors than I do now. I mean, I don't, again, I'm probably pushed down on the search results or I'm not doing whatever. There must be something marketing basis for it or something,
Yeah.
or like jewelry. I mean, so many people do their own jewelry that you can't sell it.
Yeah.
You just can't, I
Yeah.
don't think you can do it very well. I don't think that's possible because there's so many people that are doing it for free, basically. They're
Yeah.
not trying to make money from it. So I think that horror might be like that. But, it's also just become a lot more people have been trained in it. So the competition's out there. But I think
Yeah.
it's really useful. I would say that people will ask me like, what should I study first? I'm like, the way my courses work, they start from the beginning. So you
Yes.
can do whatever you want. You don't have to do one, then another one. But I like horror a lot. Is how I started. And I think that I even do sort of a horror style natal.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a really good, I think that one of the problems with people that do astrological magic is that, particularly if they're self-trained, is that and even people that did my course to a certain extent, is that they've only done that one style.
Yeah.
And if you haven't done natal and electional and horary, you don't have a complete understanding of it. And
Of
so then
how it
again,
works.
how
Yeah.
you look at the astrological magic elections, because it's a very limited type of election, you know, you
Yeah.
don't have the full to really master it. It's good to do all of them. Now, I haven't done mundane, so I have the same, you could say, oh, well, you're not entirely mastering it, but
Yeah.
it's just one of those things that like, it's actually a serious field and it could take years to train and practice. I mean, even if you do one of my courses, it would take you probably a year to get through the course. That's what people ask me. So how long does it take? I'm like, that's the wrong question.
Yeah. That's
How
like
fast can I get through this? How can I jam through this as fast as possible? I'm like,
exactly.
just like I said with the developing intuition, I won't let people go through my course more than one lesson every 3 weeks. Because what I
Yeah.
was noticing was people would try to send me 15 lessons at once and they just wanted, it's like the way you do a normal educational thing
Yeah.
in like a class, a course, is you go through it as fast as possible. You pick up this information, do information dump on the test, and then you forget it. I mean,
Yeah.
I did a college course, online course in like spreadsheets, right?
Yep.
I got an A, and I can't do a single thing with spreadsheets now.
Yeah. Because it was,
But I have an
again,
A.
yeah, but
You
you got
know,
it.
I got the cut through the course, but you know what I'm saying? Is like
On your
none of
resume,
it
it says,
stuck.
yeah, very good
Exactly.
at
That's what I'm
Excel.
saying. The point of that is, and see, what's weird about my courses is that you can't get a job with the course. I
Oh,
don't have any, it's all adults, and they're only doing it because they're interested.
yeah.
So that's kind of completely the opposite of it. The other thing that's weird about my courses is no grades and no deadlines. So people are always emailing me saying, I'm sorry I didn't get this done. I'm like, take as long as you want. I'm like, I don't care. I mean, it's your course.
Yeah.
You're the one to, or people cheating or whatever. I'm like, why would I care about that? I
Like,
could care less. It's you're only cheating yourself. What do I care? You know what I mean? It's
exactly.
like
Yeah.
it's not for. I do have a certificate at the end, but I only got that from pressure. People are asking me for. I'm like, okay, I'll make one
They
on a
wanted,
certificate.
they wanted something on paper, and
Which
you're
is
like, here you
fine. I mean,
go.
I don't have any problem with that. You know what I'm saying though? But to me, the traditional view is that you're someone's student.
Yeah.
And you say, what's your background? Oh, I'm a student of so and so's.
Yeah.
There you go. Not
Yeah.
like a certificate or like a degree or whatever.
Yeah.
And I said, I think just think the modern educational system is so messed up
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
dysfunctional in terms of action. What it does is rank people.
Yes.
It does a very good job of ranking people.
Yeah.
Now arbitrarily, but it ranks. You got a ranking. But in terms of learning things, it's an incredibly expensive, inefficient, messed up way to learn
Yeah.
things.
Because
And
everybody learns
so
differently and at different paces, which I think
well,
is
just they're
like,
not focused on learning. It's
no,
not about
exactly.
learning, and it's hugely expensive
Yeah.
and inefficient. So it's like, I mean, again, like lawyers, I mean, I would abolish law school and just have people apprentice like they used to. I mean, it'd be a
Yeah.
much more effective way of learning. Because, I came out of law school, I couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you'll teach you that at the law firm. Like, why? What are you good for then?
Why did I go
Yeah,
through school?
I
Yeah.
know exactly. Because I could get my card punched. You know what I mean? So it's like it's a guild system to limit the number of people that do stuff.
Yeah.
And it really is like um so that's what I would say is like I'm really believe in um you know doing what's necessary. The other thing that's weird about it is people like will again ask me where are the lectures, and it's
Yeah.
like I don't do lectures. I mean, I
Yeah.
have some video introduction to stuff because some things it's nice to show. I just like people others it's kind of fun, but for me, again, it's such an inefficient way of getting information to watch a video.
Yeah.
And I remember going to lectures where they would read their notes and then everyone would write them down. I'm like, why don't you just give them the notes? It just
Yeah.
seems like a very inefficient way of doing it.
Sounds like,
Now,
yeah.
people learn in different ways. And one of the things I've really enjoyed as being a teacher
Yeah.
is kind of learning how to teach different people. Now, people that my course is more or less structured like a college course. So if you can handle reading stuff and writing essays about it or whatever,
Yeah.
answering questions, then you can handle it. Some people, though, they really need to have stuff broken down.
Yeah.
And so that's what I've gotten good at, or people just have different approaches to it. So that's been kind of fun for me to kind of adapt to that.
Yeah.
But it is kind of hard. I always have to, I'm always apologizing to people about stuff like, well, I have kind of weird way of teaching. So it's kind of odd as far as how they do it. But I think that, one of the things I'm trying to do is see if you do a lecture course, right? Then, and that's all you do, 100% information comes from a lecture, then they're stuck with just that information.
Yeah.
And in medieval Renaissance astrology, we have a part of what I give with these PDFs of all these books. So you get like 10,000 pages of source. But the problem is it's all 17th century.
Yeah.
And so you need to, first of all, figure out how to read that stuff and then how to work with it. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do is it's very reader focused. If you're going to be able to function in that area, because when you finish my course, then you can go read the sources. If you're interested, say,
Yeah.
in medical astrology, which I don't teach, there's like, I've got a whole CD or whatever, and I don't do CD anymore, but like whatever it is, like a half
Yeah.
a gig full of these books,
Yeah.
and you can go work from the books. So that's part of what I'm trying to do is to get people to be able to, but if you only could learn through a lecture, some
Yeah.
people say things like, well, I want somebody in my own, or people say, I want somebody in my hometown. Like, so well, good luck with that. Same thing with this. So like, well, it has to be a lecture. I'm like, well, then you're not going to learn it.
And you're not going to
I
learn.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. If you insist on it has to be given to you in this particular form,
Yeah.
but that's part of that whole Amazon thing. I mean, people are used to being like, I can have whenever I want it, in whatever form I want. And if I don't like it, I'll send it back.
Yeah.
And I'm the king of the world and everybody has to cater to me, And I do get a certain amount of people that treat me as a teacher like I'm a waiter. And my job is they'll just tell me what they want and I come bring it to them, right?
Yeah.
and they'll
Yeah.
structure the curriculum and they'll ask I mean, they'll pay for the course and then they just want to ask questions. They don't want to
Exactly.
work through the material. I'm like,
Yeah.
have you ever taken a course where you could just ask the teacher questions? You didn't have to show up. There wasn't a curriculum.
Yeah.
This is really odd, but
Yeah.
it's like, you know, part
Yeah.
of teaching is not just information, but how it's structured,
Yeah.
and I start off with beginning and it builds. That's why, example, you don't turn in homework 3 before I've corrected homework 2.
Yeah.
Because again, you
Exactly.
might get you know what I mean? There's a whole building, but this is all weird. Western modern people are not very good students. And part of it's this idea that it's just say, oh, my students, we're all equals and I learned so much from my students. Like I've never learned any astrology from a student. Never. Nothing. I've never learned anything about astrology from a student. Never, ever, ever. I know way more than my students.
Yeah.
And so it's like, which isn't to say that, I'm superior to them in some way, inherently, but
Uh-huh.
in terms of knowledge, yes, I'm way
Like
the frick ahead of them.
you
Why you have me as a teacher, you know?
exactly. Yeah. Why do you
And
think
and
that you're in that role to begin with? Like,
exactly. But just hold the exaltation of the ego stuff. I mean, that's the true religion of the 20th and 21st century is the ego
yeah,
self,
it's the ego
you know?
self. Yeah.
And so I think that that's other people. I mean, I have Saturn in Aquarius rising, so it is kind of like cold foreboding. I'm not necessarily the most cuddly, and I'm a lawyer. I mean, this is some heavy, serious shit. You're not going to get, you know, mama bear. You know what I mean?
Oh,
It's like
you're
that's
like
just that's
factorial.
how it
You're
is.
like,
Yeah,
this is how it
exactly.
is.
But
Exactly. Yeah.
at the same time, that this stuff it would be hard to learn it otherwise. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
You've got
And
the discipline intact. It's
and
within you
what's
to do
really
it.
kind of interesting about the course too is that in the old days, if you wanted to be an astrological magician, you'd have to travel, you have to find someone to teach you. You'd have to travel hundreds of miles and you'd probably put you through all these tests and everything.
Yeah.
For me, the test is the course.
Yeah.
You have to be disciplined to do the course because
Yeah.
there's no deadlines.
Yeah.
So if you don't feel like doing it, I'm not going to be emailing me people, where's your course stuff? It's like, and that's part of what the
Yeah.
course stuff is you have no choice but to do it
Yeah.
because you're going to it's like you're going to get zapped. You're going to get an F or whatever. You're going to have a problem if you don't do the work. I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
It's like if you want to do it, do it. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. And I also
Exactly.
think, I mean, I have, for example, a teacher. I learned a lot of stuff privately from him, but I has his natal course, Robert Zoller, and I never actually physically took the course, but it's useful reference material. So I
Yeah.
think there's plenty of people that have my course stuff as reference material too, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
And that's a perfectly legitimate way of taking this and then working on it the way
And then
you want
just
to do it
adding it to the
yourself.
repertoire. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So
Yeah.
that's what I feel like. But if you want me to teach you, and you do need to do lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, and do the homework because
Yeah.
it's not worth my time. Like, oh, I don't know about that. And I'm like, because I'll look at stuff and I'm like, for example, recently somebody in my astrological magic course was like, how do I know a planet's retrograde? And I'm like, didn't I put that in the course? And I looked back and I said, I didn't. I mentioned retrograde, but the symbol of retrograde looks like the RX for prescriptions.
Yes. Yeah.
And so if a planet's retrograde on the chart, it'll have that R with an X over next to it. And that to me is so basic, but I'm like, I put in my notes for the next upgrade. I'm like, I'm gonna put
Yeah.
this something in there because my
No.
horary course, I mentioned it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So a
Yeah.
lot of the stuff is like, as I go through this, I'm like, you know what? I could do a better job of teaching it. And if people are asking me the same question, I'm like, I need to go back and redo it. So it's
Growing
not to say
pains. Yeah.
I can't improve and there's a lot of stuff I can do, but
Yeah.
that's more to do with, you know,
Just
basically putting things in a form where people, make it as simple as possible for people, make it as easy as
exactly. You're
possible.
making it
But
easier by having it be tried and true, right? Like but like I said, it's growing pains. It's
what's
as
cool
it falls
about
into
it,
the right lap, it's the yeah,
yeah, what's
great.
cool about it is that these are applied spirituality.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you can spend a lot because astrology and magic really work through the, spiritual means. Now, how you can conceptualize it in different ways, but these are spiritual technologies, so to speak. And so it's very useful to be able to go and just work with them in a very
Yeah.
practical practice way and then see it have the results that you get from it, whether it's
Yeah.
magical or astrological prediction or whatever. And so I think I've read a book called The Celestial Way,
Yes.
which is about my devotional practice. And so it's essentially about integrating these astrological magic practices as a devotional practice. And so it's almost like Catholic, like the saints or Mary or doing a
Yeah.
novena or something like that. It's very much has that quality to it. And even though my spiritual path has been very much a wisdom path and inquiry path, you need to balance that with a bhakti, with the devotional stuff. So that's
Yeah.
been good. And because I do believe that astrology, astrological magic has a capacity to be a tantric path, so a ritual path to enlightenment, but I haven't done that. I mean,
No.
all my experiences have been in the, like I said, the non-yoga path. Like, I don't know, like Zen, Advaita Vedanta, and then modern non-duality. Are you familiar with modern non-duality? Like
I've
Adyashanti, people like
yes,
that?
yeah, a little bit, but
Yeah.
not
So
well
that's
versed.
your big modern, probably one of the most active and successful modern spiritual paths is that modern non-dual. And you know, but that doesn't really relate to astrology. You know
Yes.
what I mean?
Like,
So for me to say, yeah, it's a completed spiritual path, it's like, no, I think as a somebody will come along eventually and do it, you know.
yeah.
But like, you know, Tantra, you can do the ritual stuff and you can become enlightened through it,
And that's
you
exactly
know,
it.
like
That's
visualizations and things like that. So I do think that that's has what that that astrological magic and has the capacity to do that.
yeah.
But right now, what we have is the magical practice, and
Yeah.
that is something that's very useful for people to follow. But I
Yeah.
think that we're living in a hermetic renaissance. We're living in a period where this tremendous. We had the whole atheistic materialism and science and everything for 300
Yeah.
years. So we got internet, and now it's everyone's connected, and we can just explode all
Yeah.
over the place. And
Exactly.
so it's a really amazing opportunity for people to be in contact with just a zillion different things.
Exactly.
And so,
Yeah. It's almost overwhelming because like yeah, we've everything's at our fingertips. I want to know everything. I want to know everything right now. And I think that download mentality is kind of what we were talking about. It's like they want to know it now. They want their certificate now. They just want to, they want it downloaded literally. And if they could, right? But that is,
like the
again,
Matrix, you know, like
kind
remember
of,
that they sit there and just like, oh, now I can do
I
kung
know it.
fu,
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah, and I got it.
literally, exactly. And
The
it's, yeah,
A teacher of mine said though, he said, you know, you can't dig a well with a lot of shallow holes.
yeah, yeah,
And this is the thing is that what I've tried to do is that all the traditions that I work in, first of all, I work in a tradition because I can't reinvent the wheel. I don't have the
absolutely.
arrogance to think that I can come up with something that all these people came up with.
Yeah,
And then I become initiated.
yeah.
I actually formally get initiated in the tradition just as a sign of respect. So like Zen, I mean, I have the lay initiation. I'm not a priest, but I have the lay initiation in Zen. I even got when I went to Japan, got initiated and got some sort of like a ritual connection to Vairocana with tantric. So
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
initiated both in Zen Buddhism and Japanese tantric Buddhism, and then also
Um,
as a Darvish in Sufism. And so it doesn't give me any special powers or anything, but just says, you know, I'm willing to kind of make the effort to do the right thing. And so instead
yeah.
of being like, oh, I read about it, so therefore I feel like I'm a
Oh,
Sufi, I'm like I actually did get initiated and participated pretty heavily in it.
yeah,
And I think that, I mean, of course, if you want to be a Sufi, that it's hard in the United States.
yeah,
I mean, you need to be in a major metropolitan area, and then it's going to be westernized. So it's one of those things. Is like the Western stuff. It seems like we don't have our traditions all kind of died out. So we've all had to
yeah.
kind of revive everything. But and I wouldn't want to. The cultural appropriation sort of stuff kind of ends up being like blah blah blah. But I'm like, I can do Zen. The Japanese people don't mind if you do Zen. I
No,
mean, they never
yeah,
think you're ever going to be like a Japanese person, but they
exactly.
kind of like the fact that you're doing it. And so I think that that's useful. If you get heavily into something, you're going to get more out of it than a lot of stuff at a superficial level. And part of it is stop reading about it, stop arguing about it on social media, and do it,
To do it.
you know, and do it pretty intensively for a period of time. And so typically the traditional stuff has more depth to it, but it also doesn't mean that you can't do whatever, you know, if you're going to do whatever type of magical stuff you want to do, you know, practice it. But I like the idea of the record keeping is kind of fun.
Yeah, I like that
Kind of
idea of
interesting idea. Also the
looking at the
predictive stuff.
results.
I think yeah, I think really that the key for any kind of divination and working on your intuition, like I said, stop doubting yourself, practice it, see it around you. But then when you do it,
Yeah,
keep a record
yeah.
and hold on to that record. Because it wouldn't be nice to have, you know, after 20 years to have a copy of every single, you know, tarot pull that you ever did and then
Well,
results for
yeah.
10% of them.
I
Be
mean,
kind
that's
of cool
amazing.
to see what the,
Yeah. I do that now. I
because
don't
you
do
got a
like
legacy.
results. But yeah, like even like I do kind of like a cold reading. I call it like a pre-read anyways. So I kind
Mm,
of like I tap in ahead of time and I don't know anything. I know a name essentially. Like I'm gonna meet you
right.
here, here's your email, whatever. And that's where I'm like, okay, based on that, I write down everything I'm thinking, like I feel, what I see, what da, 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 I don't do any card pull. I should do that. Maybe I should add that in there, but I don't typically pull cards ahead of time until I like have permission to fully tap in, right? But
Hmm.
even as I go out day to day, when things pop into my brain, I did get to a point of writing things down. And it was like, again, it's like proof. It's like, haha, I wrote it.
No,
It
it
was there
is.
for a
I mean, that's what I
reason.
say about it is that
It's, yeah,
you did it in advance, so you didn't cold read
yeah,
them. You didn't
yeah,
get a hot read from the person. You're not
yeah.
faking it. You're not just getting it
No,
from what they told you.
exactly.
This is something you picked up in advance. It's
Yeah.
interesting because there's a description of astrologers doing exactly that kind of reading. They do a look at the, I don't know if it's the time of the appointment, but anyhow, they do it like a horary for the appointment.
Okay.
So that's just
Interesting.
in line with that too. Now I don't do that, but I've
Absolutely.
got, this is from like, like ninth to 10th century Arabic, which is
Yes.
the astrology that we do is basically was a synthesis of Vedic, um, Hellenistic, and some actually, well, actually, excuse me, Hellenistic, Persian, and then some Vedic thrown together
Yeah.
into it.
Okay.
And they created a new synthesis in about the 8th and ninth centuries. And that stuff's incredibly complex. It was by Arabic speaking. Typically, they would be Christian or Jewish or Syrian or whatever, but they used Arabic as their sort of like language. And then that got brought to Europe, but we kind of simplified it.
Yeah.
So they have an incredible amount of stuff that there's all these translations. A guy named Ben Dykes, he does a bunch of translations.
Yeah.
So all this stuff he's translated that nobody uses yet. But
Yeah.
if they wanted to get into it, there's a tremendous amount of technique and stuff. But you kind of, what people do is they buy the book, like Picatrix. You heard of
Yes.
Picatrix. We
I've heard of
translated it.
tricks.
People
Yeah.
buy it, flip through it, put it on the shelf. Like I said, the download. I got a PDF. It's like, this is
Yeah.
not, you've got a PDF isn't going to do you anything. Or the thing is, there's this idea that it's secrets,
Yes.
like or abracadabra or whatever, open sesame. And once you know the secret, which is easy to figure out, then it all
Yeah.
follows from that. And it's like
Yeah.
the reality is this stuff is an arcana. It's
Yeah.
hiding in plain sight. It's just you're not seeing it. It's too mysterious. You're not, and the stuff like 3 books of occult philosophy has been available in English for the past 300 years.
Yeah.
And that's all you need. You can do the stuff that I'm doing is basically all laid out there.
Yeah.
But you would have to have the background to be able to understand it, and you have to have the willingness to do it. And so
Exactly.
that's what's been lacking.
Yeah.
And if it's impossible, then you're not going to do it at all.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that keep
Wow.
coming back to atheistic materialism is just
Yeah.
like that's really really key to what's your reality. And if your reality, your true lived reality is that there's nothing spiritual, how can you do anything spiritual? You can do it because you're like 21st century schizoid man kind of thing. Everyone's very compartmentalized and
Yeah.
confused, you know, and that's like, but my wife, it's interesting. She's like, her natural orientation is very much that everything is alive,
Okay.
rocks and trees and everything. It's what they call animism, which is like very pejorative, but it's like that is very helpful to me because she just comes from that perspective. And it was
Yeah.
very useful for me to kind of, now that's my view of things now too, and anyone that tries to make a distinction, they're like, well, sentient beings, blah, 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 but I'm like, a rock is sentient, you
Yeah.
know, I just don't see a differentiation. It's got a rock consciousness. It's a
Yeah.
rock consciousness is a very interesting consciousness, but it's
Yeah.
not, it's
Yeah.
not unconscious. It's not
Exactly.
a different thing,
Yeah.
you know? And it's like, I mean, particularly with animals, and it's so obvious. I mean, like I said, I just don't understand how people can think that they don't have personalities and feel. I mean, obviously they do, and
Yeah.
everybody knows that.
Yeah.
The anthropomorphism, like, we have this weird thing of eating them and keeping them as pets, which
Yeah.
is, I mean, I eat meat, but it's
Yeah.
like that's all a bit weird. But I mean, it's pretty
Yeah.
clear. And we
It
have a
is
cat,
absolutely.
it's just
Yeah.
like what's funny with our cat because, for example, we're in this house and we're going to stay here as long as he's alive
Yeah.
because he has as much, he has got, we take him seriously. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's
Yeah.
like his needs are just as important as everybody else's needs. And
Exactly.
he can go outside whenever he wants. Now, unless there's a safety problem, I mean, sometimes it's like too cold out or something, but
Yeah.
normally, I mean, like in the summertime, he's out all the time, like 24 hours a day, he's out. The
Yeah.
winter, he comes in because it's too cold. But it's like we try to have a situation set up where he has autonomy and we respect that autonomy.
Yeah.
So it's like, because I don't see that I mean, other thing we laugh about It's because my wife and I tend to call each other apes because we laugh that that's what he calls us.
He's
It's
probably,
not
that's
humans,
honestly,
but we're
he's
just
like, I don't know what
apes.
you are. He
Just an
doesn't know
ape.
about
You're an
apes.
ape. They're an ape. No, we're their apes. He knows
But
what apes are.
do
He
you think
deals with them.
your cat knows about apes?
Well, he's seen it. He sees them all the time.
Your cat sees
Yeah.
apes? Oh, well,
What do you think? What
you
are
as
you?
apes.
Oh yeah, right. No,
I know, but
what do you? That's what I'm saying. That's pretty fundamental right there.
yes,
Oh,
exactly.
we're some special. Like I
Like,
said,
that's not an ape. Yeah.
what's the scientific name of us? It's Homo sapiens sapiens. It's not just the wise man. It's
Yeah.
the wise man. And I'm
Yeah.
like, get the fuck out of here.
It's like he's never
Like
seen an ape. It's like, nope.
we're just a bunch of walking apes. Okay, we killed off all the other walking apes. The tree apes are sort of around, but we're walking
Yeah.
apes.
Yeah.
That's what we are. And it's
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
we're not some special type of evolution or anything like that. We're just
No.
apes.
Yeah.
And so that's he's cool though because he's one that he operates in the three worlds, because he
Yeah.
operates in the ape world because
Yeah.
he's very good at cars. He has all this. He knows all about cars. He's beautiful with that stuff. He can handle that, dogs, all that sort of stuff. He operates in the varmint world,
Yeah.
squirrels and stuff like that, and then the cat world
Yeah.
because he's a boss cat.
Oh, I
He's an
see.
alpha cat.
Yeah.
So he's like got to fight and do all that alpha cat stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, so he's the master of the three worlds. Plus, cats are halfway into the astral anyway, all the time,
Yes. Yeah.
you know? So he's a black cat. So he's got
Oh,
some
yeah.
special powers too.
You
But
say
also, he's
already
actually what's called a she cat.
the
In
she cat.
Ireland, they have them, they have the white
White here?
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's a she cat. It's called a she cat.
The
So he's
she
got some
cat.
special, yeah,
We've had a
like the
couple of
she,
those in our
right?
past as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
So it's that's just really, I mean, I have now, because I've spent so much time with him, um a cat consciousness, a pretty strong cat consciousness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
he's got some human stuff. He's a Zen center cat. He used to live in the Zen center, so he's got a lot of Zen. He's so that's what I would say about it, is that, this idea that we're somehow separate,
Yeah.
we're not. We're just animals. I
Yeah. We're
mean,
just animals.
the civilization, everything, ants do the same thing. They have cities, they have a caste system, they have
Yeah.
domesticated animals, they have crops they grow. It's like, it's all, we're just replicating. There's always sort of Platonic ideas that we're replicating at different levels, and
Yep.
we're not special anymore. I mean, a rock is special, so this whole height of evolution, I mean, we're natural. Everything humans do is natural. I mean, for example, climate change. If you think of the end Permian extinction, do you know about the end Permian?
No.
There's periodic extinction, mass extinctions. So
Okay.
end Permian extinction is like massive, probably the worst extinction in the history of life on Earth. I think is like 2 million years ago. But anyhow, there was this volcanic eruptions massively that took place in the Siberian traps. And it came through a zone of lots of petroleum and coal. So as the volcano came up, it hit all this coal and burned it. So it burned a tremendous amount and then put off a lot of sulfur dioxide and things like that. So you've got a tremendous amount of greenhouse gas stuff, just like we have now,
Yeah.
right? And the oceans were warmed and anoxic, and then they got poisoned by the sulfur dioxide. So you had a massive die off of stuff in the ocean and then also on land too. But the Earth recovered in about 10 to 30 million years.
Yeah.
Naturally, it's sort of homeostatic processes, the Gaia kind of thing. I mean, the
Yeah.
Earth is an organism itself too. And
Exactly.
so what we're doing is just as happened before, or the Great Oxygenation Event. Are you familiar with the Great Oxygenation Event?
Yep.
So
Yep.
basically what happens, you got the anaerobic bacteria, right? They invent photosynthesis. They pump out oxygen, which is great for a while. And then after a while, it starts poisoning everything. So it's just like, it's not like one species hasn't reproduced like crazy and ruined everything before, but
Yeah.
it's all part of the process. I mean,
All part of
humans
the
are
crisis.
perfectly natural.
Exactly.
This is like this,
Mm.
nothing we're doing is unnatural. It's just part of the whole thing. So, I mean,
Exactly.
that's
Part of
part
the
of what I
whole.
try to do, is to have this longer view of things, you know,
Yeah.
and, intelligence. Another thing, well, example I like to give is reading this book about, it's like biology or something, and evolution. And it was a scientist wrote it. It's talk about pine trees. Pine trees evolved before the flowering trees, the angiosperms. And
Okay.
so they're kind of get out evolved by the flowering trees. They have some evolutionary advantages of the flowering trees. So the pine trees, the guy says, okay, the pine trees decided they go up in the mountains and they go in places with a lot of forest fires. And so they're
Okay.
adapted to that. And so he's like talking about them like they decided to do that. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, that's interesting because if you called him on that, he's like, oh no, that's not true. It's just random. I'm like, no, it makes sense to conceptualize it as the intelligence of the pine trees. I mean, they
Yeah.
have it as an entity. Same thing with COVID. And COVID
Yeah.
is so smart. It kept like
Yeah.
totally switching stuff around. You put this vaccine in and that would switch it around. And like there's an
Exactly.
intelligence operating at the level of the COVID, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
As an entity. And
Exactly.
so,
It's
or
fighting
multiple entities or
against.
whatever.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's
I mean, not just
adapting. Yeah.
I'm not talking about metaphor because
No.
that's, oh, it's a metaphor. I'm like, no, really.
Like it's
Just like,
changing. Yeah.
because here's the other one. In Buddhism, the view is that there's no self,
Yeah. Okay.
right? It's an illusion. It's like if you think of a cartoon, you have still pictures
Yeah.
and you run the still pictures quickly, it looks like it's movement.
Yeah.
So with what we call us, there's a mind stream, there's thoughts and feelings and experiences, but if you run them all together, there's an illusion of a continuity of self.
Yeah.
And so again, conceptualizing us as people works as a model. It's not really true.
No.
So it's okay to do that for pine trees, COVID, and for angels. It's just as accurate, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's what I would say, that ultimately that these are all modeling,
Yeah.
right? But I think I like them. I like the traditional approach. I like the traditional models. And so it's useful, but it's not true because
Yeah.
nothing's ultimately true. Now, here's the
That's
thing
true.
about models. And this is what we're talking about, you're testing with the writing your results down.
Yeah.
If you do your model and you're surprised by anything that happens, you need to get your model back,
Yeah.
work on it, because
Yeah.
you should never be surprised. If you're shocked or if something's happening that's not supposed to happen, then you need to get your model worked out.
Yeah.
And that's the way. See, it's not relativist because, oh well, whatever you want is that's the way it works. It's like, no, that doesn't work either.
Yeah.
So it tends to be there's no one right answer. There's a few sort of right answers, and there's a whole bunch of just total BS that doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. But that's the test, is reality. But reality is multifaceted. Like you're talking about light and dark. This is what that's this huge duality, that good evil duality, that light dark duality.
Yeah.
In law, the duality is a justice mercy duality, because
Okay.
strict justice, getting exactly the total punishment that you deserve, it's like, who'd escape whipping? We'd all be in trouble. But if
Yeah.
it's mercy, then the innocent suffer, because then people are running around doing all sorts of crazy shit and there's nothing stopping them. So you
Yeah.
have to have that's the duality. That's what I deal with as a lawyer, right? And in my working with judges, I mean, I found my increasingly much more. I won't ever be a judge, but I find I've been teaching them. I mean, that's
Yeah.
sort of what I do, is to sort of teach and support judges, and that's what you have to kind of grapple with,
Yeah.
you know. And so the thing about reality is that it never can be encapsulated by any one model, you know. And so you have
Yeah.
to have a selection of models and use them in as appropriate in situations. So that's essentially
Yeah.
what we're doing, is we're giving this a lot of models. It's like a toolkit. And
Yeah.
so the traditional astrology toolkit is full of stuff, and you
Yeah.
use it in appropriate circumstances. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You know what I mean? Like talisman. Sometimes, in terms of working, people will be like, oh, I want my boyfriend back. It didn't work. It's a bad talisman. And in fact, the whole thing doesn't work. I'm like, well, maybe that wasn't a realistic goal,
Yeah.
right? Maybe
Exactly.
if
Yeah.
you thought about love, just asking for love in general, that would have worked better. Or
Exactly.
rather than trying to control the outside world, how about being transformative of you? How about you become a more loving person,
Yes.
And that's maybe in the long run would be a more effective way anyway. And the
Exactly.
less you think about results, maybe the better results you're going to get.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I'm not particularly result oriented, but I've done really well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as opposed to somebody who's like, I'm a sorcerer, and, because I've had people say, magic is more than just begging the gods for favors, make them do what you want. I'm like, that doesn't appeal to me as an approach. And
No.
I'm not sure how effective it really is. Anyone that I could tell what to do, any
Yeah.
being, an angel, a demon I could order around, how powerful is that?
I was gonna
Whereas the
say, yeah.
Jupiter, I mean, I can't control Jupiter, but if I can hang out with him,
Exactly. You
that's
can
going to be more
borrow some
wise.
energy. Exactly.
Exactly. So that's what I would say about it. So I think
Yeah.
that we're lucky to live in a time period where we have such a tremendous amount of choice. But I think ultimately what you want to do is find the path that resonates for you. Make sure, as Carlos Castaneda said, it's a path of heart, and then go deep into that. And then you can do other stuff too. I mean, I've
Yeah.
pursued multiple things. It's not like I've only done one thing, but the things I have done, I have benefited, I think, from going deeply in them. At the same time, it's also good to be superficial.
Yeah.
There's something to be said for not having to be so damn serious about everything that you do, you
Yes.
know. But there are benefits.
Mm.
to a serious practice and, study and practice and getting
Yeah.
deeply into stuff.
No, I think that's completely fair. I think, kind of moving into like the last part here is when we kind of, I think I talked about a little bit of like, when we do a reading for like the week ahead. And as you've been kind of talking, it seems to be like I know I said a call to action earlier, but it is like I think people need to be a little bit more not serious because again, we're in our season 3, we're kind of into those more serious conversations about what to pursue. And it is kind of like, okay, if something's been calling to you, whatever it is in the world of this, it does seem like give it the extra effort, spend some time with the subject. If one has come to you, especially, in the astrology world or whatever, it's the now's the time to do that, right? What are you losing in committing a little bit more time to venture out and give yourself that extra.
We're also running out of time.
Oh yeah, but that too. Yeah.
I know, I mean, just us personally, but I'm talking about the
No, yeah.
society. I
Yeah.
mean, industrial society has got this very short shelf life. I mean, today did you see that thing about the Microsoft? There's some huge IT breakdown and every single
Yes.
thing shut down. I
Yep.
mean, that was just a mistake from a software update.
Yep.
And yet it was like hundreds of thousands of people throughout the world. Now,
Yep.
what if you have something more serious,
Yep.
right? What if you have something more like, the North Koreans or whatever, the Americans or somebody
Yeah.
decides to sabotage stuff? It's like, we're so dependent. And then just the whole climate change stuff. Again, I don't know,
Yeah.
people are all different politically about that, but it seems to me the weather's messed up.
Yeah. The
It
things
seems
are
to me that there's
different.
stuff that's really different. Exactly. And it's like,
Yeah.
so we've got this internet now, we've got all
Yeah.
this stuff available. Let's hurry get the stuff out there. And I mean, I was thinking about like, I don't know if you've heard of the Antikythera device. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but they
No.
discovered this encrusted weird kind of device inside on a ship,
Okay.
and it looks like it was kind of like a mechanical, like almost like a chart, or like an astronomical thing.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
you could do that with charts. Like, so for example, instead of having a computer, what you'd have would be a bunch of disks, and you
Yes, that
just
would just
spin it
kind of
around to the
rotate
date.
together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it'd do the chart.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we didn't basically, you'd have to probably do it for a particular location, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't do it universally. But I'm like, that would be nice to have,
Just to have,
along with,
exactly.
for like 200 years from now, when, if we're back to like,
Yeah.
farming kind of stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
I'd like to be encoding some of this because right now we're totally dependent on computers. I mean, I have
Yeah.
done charts by hand, but I
Yeah.
still used a calculator,
Yeah.
and you could do it. Basically, what you need for that is a book of tables and an ephemeris, and you could do it. And I had people say, "Oh, I mean, it used to be people don't ask me much anymore. Like, do you do it by hand?" And I'm like, "No, I use software." And they're like, "Oh, I don't want to study with you." I'm like, you don't have. I mean, doing it
Yeah.
by hand just teaches you how to do it by hand.
That's literally
Doesn't do anything fundamentally,
exactly. It's a
doesn't
whole
teach you
other
anything
course,
fundamental.
actually.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's William Lilly was talking about, he had so much business that he would send his charts out. So
Yeah.
he would love software. He'd be like, oh, great, it's instantaneous, instead of having to pay someone else to do it because he was too
Yeah.
busy to do it. But I think though that the technology is, um, it's just fleeting. That's what I would say, is that we've got this really brief period where we're getting, it's massively available. And so it would be nice to, and that's why, like, I mean, my next thing I need to do is write a book that's a textbook of astrological magic. And
Yes. Yeah.
that would be my legacy. And, because if you don't write a book, then it's kind of, it evaporates, that
Yeah.
puts everything together, and puts it in it, because you have to structure everything to even just to write it, you
Yeah.
know, and then, but it also puts it in a form that's, that's usable. So I think that's my ambition, is that I'm going to have, that's, I don't know what, because it has to kind of come out when things are ready to come out, they come out.
They come
But
out.
that's
Yeah.
kind of, I've been saying it. I've been openly, I outlined it and I've been saying it now. So hopefully that's going to help me
So
get going. And
let
I'm
it
actually
out, Chris.
writing it. Yeah. Though, I mean, what's going to happen when I write is people are going to bitch about it because, like, well, it doesn't explain everything. I mean, it's going to be advanced textbook. It won't be
Yeah.
like just like pick it up and like, because I've seen a book like everything you need to know about astrology in one book. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah. That's
you
the
know, it's
volume
just like,
one.
yeah, yeah, volume one. Yeah, exactly. But it's just one of those things that's like, there's always, I tend to get one criticism upsets me more than 100 people saying I did a great job. So
Yeah.
that's just my personal stuff. But
Yeah.
I think no one likes criticism. But it's like, nevertheless, I think that it's, despite the fact there'll be some sniping, that's really what I know that I need to focus on.
Yeah.
So
That's your
that's the way
next
it goes.
thing. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Chris, it was lovely to sit and digest all of this with you. I know like in your previous interviews, you've mentioned that you like to teach your students how to think. And I definitely felt that. We're like, okay, pushing and challenging us to do that. But no, but it's like, again, I think you've allowed us to kind of enter your world a little bit and kind of dabble in, this new area to us, because like I said, the happenstance of me finding your page and us having this interaction, it all aligns really well for me. So thank you so much again for coming and spending, the time with us and really, like I said, giving us this gift of your time. And just like, so you could tell you just have a passion for this. And I do hope that, our listeners can feel that passion for something like this as well, right? To have the confidence to go out there and talk about it freely. Like that's what I
Yeah.
hope
So
people can find.
if people are interested, I mean, obviously my website, which is renaissanceastrology.com, is a great place to check. And
Yeah.
so that's a great kind of gateway into finding out about the courses that I do. And I
Yeah.
have full courses and mini courses, the kind of an intro course, kind of get your feet wet, as well as a full course. The different kinds of readings,
Yep.
horary readings, the different natal readings that I do, and then electional readings for picking times to do things. There's a book page for the books that
Yep.
I've written and published, and then talismans. And
Yeah.
so with talismans, what you can do is if you're the talismans are probably like $300 to $400 is
Yeah.
probably the price range. If you're serious about getting a talisman, if you're like, okay, I'm willing to pay that, and you're interested in about, you can just email me, go to my
Yeah.
contact page with your date of birth. And what I'll do is take a look at your birth chart and then kind of give you back some suggestions. And you could ask about a specific talisman, like you said, is this compatible? Or you could say like my goals. Now, one thing about goals is one talisman typically won't do 15 different things.
No.
I mean,
Yeah.
it typically will be like Venus will do love, but it won't. I mean, I actually have a Venus talisman that's a wealth talisman too. That's just kind of cool. But normally they wouldn't. And so if
Yeah.
you want to do wealth and love, you need to get two talismans. But I'd be happy to, like I said, if you're serious about getting a talisman, I'd be
Yeah.
happy to do that. So that's kind of like that's all accessible and available. And then of
Yeah.
course the website itself has got, I think it's 700 pages of
It's
stuff on there. And you can
fantastic.
just
And
kind
I
of wander
do,
around,
yeah.
wander aimlessly, and learn new things. So
Yeah.
that's another option too.
Yeah. Actually, while I was wandering your website, I came across a name. I want to
Hmm.
say it was his name, Peter Binsfeld. I don't know if it was,
I don't
anyways,
know.
I'll leave that name with you anyways, but from our last episode, um, oh, anyways, it's a family name of ours, and my sister and I really went down, we're like, what does it mean? Anyways, so, but what I mean is on your website, you can be in there for a while and find so much information about so many different things that, yeah, anyways, we could discuss
Yeah, I
Peter
tried to
Binsfeld right
be.
away.
This was like, even if I was to do a more up-to-date website, I would leave the old one up because it's just,
Yeah.
I think, got so much useful information on it. But
Yeah, like
there's also stuff I haven't looked at in 15 years. There's probably pages that are like, it's like,
absolutely. Yeah, no, of
I was
course.
much more active. I changed, I still am tinkering with it every day, but it's like mostly do price changes or whatever,
Yeah,
updating things. But um, so good. Well, I very much enjoyed being on the podcast, and I always like to talk. There's so much interest. That's what's amazing to me
yeah,
is it's like it's just exploding all over the place. So it's cool
absolutely.
for me to be able to like respond to that.
Yeah,
And you can see I like to talk, so it's
no,
always
that's
nice
great.
for me to do and to teach. I mean,
No,
teaching is really what I probably one of the things I enjoy the most. And
exactly.
it's
Yeah,
great an opportunity to talk to and then to talk to people because it's really
exactly.
kind of
That's
cool
great.
to do it. So good.
It's building a safe place to do this kind of stuff too, right? So I guess as a lawyer, a wizard, and
Hmm.
teacher,
Hmm.
you've got
Yes,
quite a
all those
lot
things.
to give. It's great. You're all of those things. Confirmation that yes, you've earned all of that. Well, very good. Well, I'll make sure that everything is going to be in our show notes regarding where we can find you. And, if there's got any questions, I'll make sure to reference your email or your contact
Yeah, and
page on
send
our
me a
website.
link once you get it
Oh,
up,
yeah.
and I'll
Send
promote it.
it.
I'll put it up on my groups and stuff too, so that's good.
Absolutely. Perfect.
Great.
Okay. Well, and then for my Basic Banter crew, you guys can find us on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube, Basic Banter for Witches, and you can email us all the lovely things, basicbanterforwitches@gmail.com. So I guess we'll stop this, but you hang on there, Chris. To everybody else, you guys have a wonderful week, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.